Ja, nu staan.
Alle druk.
Het is best zie je dat er een beetje naast staat.
Dat is goed, maar
Staat dat?
dat is het beste voor hen. Die is heel goed.
Maar ik vind vooral dat scherm niet, hè, dat weet ik.
Wat? Wat? Nee, nee, nee.
Hier? Waar?
Hij is veel groter, hè? Zet maar langs. Daar is hij. C'est bon. C'est bon. Wat zeg je?
Ik heb een klein beetje achter.
Hier wil je de bekjes, hè?
Wifi hebben?
Hier, voilà. Normaal gezien, hier is wifi, maar... Bon. Wat er wel nog, hè? Mettre les deux, tu vois.
Tu peux comprendre que sur la gauche droite, tu dis ok, il y a le bouton comme ça,
Avec l'Alexandre, tu as des choix collectifs. C'est comme ça. C'est bon.
c'est quoi?
Ça me va.
Oui, c'est ça.
Il arrive à 15h, ça?
Ouais. Ah non, non, lui il arrive plutôt. Là, il est à 15.
Et c'était là en train de rigoler, tu sais.
Ah bon, monnaie, Mino, oui.
Oui, c'est quelque chose mono ou mono quelque chose.
Petit moment, c'est aussi lui donner un trépied. Lui, c'est.
Non, non, lui c'est cravate. C'est juste pour les questions. Comme ça te permet de les placer où tu veux aussi pour l'axe regard. Comme ça, ils bougeront pas.
Pour le son, c'est aussi bon aussi.
Ouais, c'est une catastrophe.
Bah,
Il est bien.
non, il peut il a pas de problème.
Qui le câble qui est intéressé sur ça.
L'intérêt, c'est de poser des challenges à la son, je crois.
Pourquoi il faut ça?
C'est cette cabine qui a des.
Ah oui, je sais.
Essaye d'aller plus vite.
Il laisse ça ici, comme ça il va demander quelque chose. La carte, tu vois.
Moi, je trouve que c'est quand même. Les gars du social media team, c'est quand même pas mal. Hein?
De qui?
Social media team.
Et vous savez,
Tu peux parler à ce micro, Stéphane?
Vous voyez, lequel? Celui-là. On l'a vu déjà, il est beaucoup plus grand. Je sais qu'il est beaucoup plus grand. C'est un Hollandais.
ah oui. Au toucher à la race, tu peux pas toucher. Tu le fais comme ça,
Ouais, ça dépend.
il a la ils sont là, ils sont tous dans le coin. Tu sais, à Afghanistan, les mecs, ils touchent pas les femmes. C'est plus que ça. C'est pas
Il n'y a rien à faire. C'est comme quand tu essaies de. Tu vois, si tu prends une bouteille en plastique, tu la froisses un peu et que tu refermes le bouchon.
ouais, voilà.
Tu vas la remettre droit à un endroit, ça va ch'kic à un autre endroit. Eh ben, c'est pas.
Non,
What must be, must be. Quoi.
à l'époque, il y avait, quand je travaillais pour Solana, lui, il avait dit, on était toujours dans les pays arabes. Lui, comme il est espagnol, il avait dit comment on fonctionne avec le roi de l'Arabie Saoudite. Chez lui, on parlait. T'imagines? Lui, les mecs, tous, il s'est prend la main tout le temps, quoi.
Mais Solana, il adore faire ça.
Après, hein, il prenait comme
Mais
ça.
moi, les Espagnols, c'est un truc. Moi, les Espagnols, même là, tu vois, j'ai du mal. Les Espagnols, moi, je te jure, même les filles, hein, je te jure, pourtant, je suis pas
Inès,
prude.
c'est comment c'est parfois.
Je suis pas prude et tout, mais arrête de me toucher. Mais je te jure, en Espagne, moi j'étais avec un pote, enfin chez un pote qui est là 2-3 fois à Barcelone. Et t'es là, rejoins, on te présente une gonzesse, genre une copine, elle est là.
Tout ça.
Ah, machin et tout. Et t'es là, il y a un truc.
Mais eux, ils disent tout de suite, ah, ça c'est des belles de fausses. Ah, ce sont bizarres. Des trucs bizarres. Les mecs, ils laissent pas se toucher.
Ben ouais, non, mais c'est culturel en fait, si t'as l'habitude.
Comment s'appelait la
Mais
productrice?
imagine aux États-Unis faire ça.
Ah non.
Tu fais ça, tu
Ah
vas en
non,
prison,
en
quoi.
plus,
Faire agression sexuelle.
Comment
Sexual
s'appelait comment s'appelait la productrice qui travaillait, la Nathalie?
Ouais.
Oh, elle. Ils ont tous travaillé à la
Oui, Cyril.
So if you're there, you're in the shot. Okay. That is the background of the shot. Camera is there, so yeah. Si vous voulez.
Ça va bien. Donc je voulais te faire un petit test audio pour notre live. Voilà. Qu'est-ce que tu en penses? Ça devrait être un niveau à peu près représentatif. Ah ok, tu veux dire que le son n'est pas bon, c'est juste le niveau qui est bon, c'est ça? Ça va. Ok, bah écoute... Il y a des gens qui parlent juste à côté là. Enfin là voilà, si je le tiens comme ça. Il y a des gens qui parlent juste à côté, mais je pense que ça ira mieux quand tout le monde se taira. Hein? Ouais, n'importe quoi.
Ça, c'est vers la porte alors.
Mais parce que vraiment, je sais que ça va être un point qui me dit, mais il n'y a personne derrière.
Ok. Scorpion.
So, fangen wir an. Dann wird die Präsentation. Quoi?
Donc un tout petit peu peut-être de brightness à gauche, de ça, non? Pas trop?
Ouais, si tu veux. Je fais de la
Pas de
validation.
souci, mais au moins, il y a du flou derrière.
De
Et...
toute façon, j'ai pas de moniteur, ok.
I guess has to be right in this case. You can have the light to the side and readjust.
We need to leave
It needs to be like that.
Where are, is Tony going to ask questions?
Yes. Just that next to the cabinet.
On va quand même bloquer la porte. Hein.
Yeah, you can send here.
Yeah.
On va bloquer la
On met
porte.
le précipiteur.
Tout le monde, ça? C'est pas grave. On bloque la porte.
De toute façon, il y a un couloir qui permet d'aller dans la rue. C'est là, à peu près.
Ouais. Comme ça.
Ou alors on
Ouais,
met
deux.
de l'autre côté. On dit ça va encore passer. Je crois qu'il y a un peu de chier.
Bah, qu'est-ce que tu veux faire?
Avancer ça, c'est un petit peu.
Attends, on va regarder. Toi, tu dis ça? Ça, c'est le câble. Ça, on peut pas toucher. C'est le câble. Ça.
Si tu veux le TP des câbles, je peux écouter. Allez, le TP. Tu vas dire.
Attends. Oui, c'est. Alors, ça se liste. Tu peux tirer maintenant, hein. Stéphane. Là, c'est vrai. Tu peux tout dire. Tu te fais un peu? Non, j'ai pas loué là. Ouais. Moi, je vais avancer avec ça. Attends. Sors un peu de ça.
Vas-y, avance. T'enlèves ton petit Dat is een die concreet. Dat zijn mensen die door willen, dat dat ze niet goed zijn.
Zeg dat maar aan je vriend. Hè?
Nee, maar ik zou aan een meter achter doen.
Ik kan het zo, maar dan heb je die.
Als ik hier sta, dan dat is leuk. Vast wat.
The backdrop is fine, it's very neutral.
Je kunt zitten.
Yeah, you want to look at that.
We go a bit closer. It's stretch.
Die boom, ah nee, dat weet ik niet.
Nee, it's closer, ja.
Closer? Let that up.
No, but yeah, but what is the added value of having too close,
You don't want closer.
sticking of the columns and see, oh wait,
Yeah.
so you'll be here, right?
Ja.
Yeah. Camera likes you.
Zo.
But just thinking,
Why you want more?
yeah, but now we have to, does it look very,
I like, to see a little bit of depth
Yeah,
to it,
exactly.
rather than just seeing the columns,
just
to see
not
out
the
the windows.
columns, but, because with Tim you were just zoomed in a bit, but now having a bit,
Probeer het dan hier.
there's no plans
Minder?
in here, right?
Moet je nog even dus mee, maar niet.
Wat?
I mean, I don't, not the whole, I think the way you had it then, just,
Yeah,
kind
so.
of, yeah.
Ja.
Well, no, a little bit more this way, just so you see a little bit
Zo?
more light.
Die micro? Kun je even verplaatsen?
Dit telt dus uit, waar staan daar? En waar staat tonen?
Yeah, just a little bit of light and depth.
Tonen
Yeah.
will be
Ja.
in de microfoon.
Ja.
Oké.
Daar kan je veel meer geluid hebben, door de galm.
Ja.
En de deur gaat constant open.
I would suggest that we actually do another table here, because otherwise we're going to be running.
Yeah. And it distracts Hans too much.
Exactly.
So can we have,
We need to get Tony there, and then
Is dat beter?
Maar iemand moet gaan staan.
So when you just stand, if what you want, you think it's still more like
Ja? Nog meer? Nog?
ja. Ik denk dat je meer, nog meer gang wilt.
Huh? Zo, oké. Dan heb je echt zo, hè?
Is dat beter? You prefer that? More?
I would go a little bit more towards the columns. I don't necessarily need the whole straight, like
Okay,
the whole
so
length.
go in more.
No, just turn the camera slightly more in this direction.
More like
Yeah,
this.
that's the thing, not the full, yeah.
You do it like this, but you will ever. You will always hear people looking strangely at the.
Okay, yeah,
That-
you prefer it like that? Okay.
Perfect like this. But that,
François? Met wat zien? Omdat we zelf in de muur. Met dat ons zakje. Tu vois, lui c'est...
niet te veel niet te veel van die dingen dan. Minder nog. Meer, minder?
nee, niet in.
Uitgezoomd, uitzoomen.
Uitzoomen.
Zodat het draait als een piano.
Ah, zo, oké.
Willen we die tafel op de vloer?
Yeah,
So people will be walking
Schumann, right?
Een klein beetje nog.
Il est dans le
Ja.
sac.
Perfect.
Even tussen de voeten.
Dus jij begint zo met de welkom.
Okay. It's music, huh?
There's music here, yes.
Because you're going to hear that in my microphone, that music, I'm sure.
Maar hij is redelijk goed op je.
Ah.
Is the sound okay? It's quite low. It would be better if you stop it.
That's better.
Yeah, I know, I'm waiting. Test, test, test. You can hear me, okay? Dus jij begint, hè?
Zeg maar wanneer.
Okay, guys. 1 minute. Is that what people send, or is it what? Okay. Okay. You count down, and then you can start.
We're ready? Okay.
Good afternoon and welcome to another session of Facebook Live. Today we're going to talk about globalization. How do we make sure that this horse we ride is tamed and does good things for us instead of kicking us in the head? I'm looking forward to your questions. Many things we need to discuss, many things that are coming to Europe, to the rest of the world in this fourth industrial revolution. How will we make it work for us? Please give me your questions and I'll be happy to answer them to the best of my abilities.
Well, Mr. Timmermans, thank you. The first question came in by Anne Thompson, and she says that globalization can cause problems when an industry moves to another country, creating unemployment in some countries, while others get low-paid jobs. How would you like to respond to that?
Well, you will always see in the global economy, you will see shifts, businesses moving elsewhere. That is not a development you can stop by building walls or building borders. What you need to do is to create new opportunities. What we've seen in the European economy is that it is changing. It's changing towards more services-based economy. It's changing towards robotization, which is going to be one of the main factors in the future of our economy. And so what we need to do is, if a business decides to move elsewhere, first we need to analyze why, and if that analysis is correct and there's no foul play, because if there's foul play we should intervene. If there's no foul play, we should then create new opportunities. This is the model that has worked well, not well enough yet, so we need to solidify our industrial base in Europe so we create new jobs, future-oriented jobs, and do something about this terrible scourge which is youth unemployment.
Well, thank you. You also say free trade should become a bit more fair trade. What would you mean by that?
Well, you know, trade is developing in a way that it's no longer just about tariffs, because freeing trade in the past meant lowering tariffs. Now trade is about much more. It's about goods and services. It's also about regulation. And we want fair trade because we don't want to compete with other parts of the world on labor cost, on social protection, on safety at the workplace, on environmental protection. So if we want fair trade, we want our trading partners to abide by the same rules in terms of social protection, in terms of environmental protection that we want for ourselves. That is the future of trade, to be on an equal footing in terms of the protection our society demands.
Do you feel that globalization has brought us a lot of benefits, or is it now time to really protect ourselves?
Well, by and large, I think, and this is an opinion that is shared by most Europeans, globalization has brought benefits as a positive development. But we should not be naive or complacent about the downsides of globalization. For instance, just one example, major corporations that move around the world have developed a business model where they can negotiate with countries so that they almost pay no taxes. I think that is not a business model for the future. I think our societal models need companies who pay a fair amount of tax. And I also don't want major corporations to be in a more advantageous situation than local businesses. So creating a fair tax system is extremely important to make sure that one member state or one country cannot played off against another country in terms of tax competition is something we need to work on in the next a couple of years. And there's an increasing consensus between the member states of the European Union that we need to do this. So yes, there are benefits in globalization. We could even benefit more from globalization than we're doing today, but we also have to take care of the downsides of globalization. The market will not take care of itself. There will be regulation, there will be intervention by public authorities at all levels to make sure that this is a fair deal for everybody in our society.
Thank you. Mr. First Vice President, Bobby Dotchev asks, when you say globalization has to work for all of us, who is all of us? Who is included in us?
Us is everyone in society. What you see now is that the economy, the way it works today, benefits a number of people, but not everyone in society. So many people in our societies feel left behind. And you see the income disparities in many of our societies have increased over the last couple of years. So it's a question of redistribution. How do you redistribute what you gain through globalization so that it benefits society as a whole? Don't get me wrong, this is not Europe that should be doing this. It's not an EU that should be doing this on its own. It's a responsibility that resides with all of us, with the EU at the EU level, but especially with member states at member state level. Redistribution within the country, redistribution on a continental scale and on a global scale will be the way forward to make sure that globalization is a benefit to every single citizen.
Diakonu George Razvan asks, should we not accept products from countries where certain labor standards are not respected, like paid holidays, healthcare, child labor?
I think in the future of fair trade deals, we should include the levels of social protection. We should exclude the possibility of child labor. These are costs that should be put into the equation. We should make sure that if we trade with people, that if we allow goods to come into the European market, that we are sure that these goods are produced according to the moral standards and social standards and environmental standards that we want for our own goods as well. That is fair trade. And it's in the interest of everyone, because I think, you know, making sure that child labor becomes a thing of the past is important, not just for the countries involved, but also for ourselves. We shouldn't be competing with products that are cheap because children who should be in school are putting these products together. That is not the way we want the global market to operate. That is not fair trade. That is unfair trade.
Thanks. And David Doria asks, how is the EU working to create more tax equality?
I think this is an incredibly complicated subject, because most member states don't want this to be fully discussed at the EU level. We have developed, my colleague Pierre Moscovici has developed a number of ideas to create a more equal tax base so that member states at the EU level agree on the base upon which tax is calculated. I think that is a good way forward. I do see that, you know, member states start to understand that we need to coordinate more at this level, that tax competition can be good in principle, but if you don't control it, it works against the public finances of member states, and it works against our own businesses, especially our small and medium-sized enterprises. So we need to do something about this. The Commission has a number of proposals. It's now up to member states to show to what extent they want to coordinate this, and they want to work along jointly to create a more just tax system.
Dieter Varga asks about social protection. How would you like to achieve that?
Well, I think the best way to have social protection is for people to have a job, so that they can afford to live the way they want to live, so they can afford to live with their families or individually in housing they want to live in, so that they can afford to save for their pensions, so that they can afford to have a decent medical coverage. So the best form of social protection is to create more jobs. The best way to create more jobs is to use the opportunities globalization has to offer. And at the same time, we have to be very clear that societies like ours need strong social systems. There is large consensus among European citizens that strong social systems is the future. And to have social systems that are sustainable, we need to be able to create economic growth. But to have economic growth that is sustainable, we also need to make sure it is environmentally correct, and we don't deplete the Earth's resources, and we make sure we develop a circular economy. So that is the way forward. It is complex. It has many, many angles, but this is the way Europe could develop into the most sustainable and strongest society on Earth with the highest level of social protection.
There's a question here that don't you think the EU needs to strengthen the efforts to communicate what the EU is, what the EU really does, and don't you need to meet the common man, and I will add the common woman?
Absolutely. I think communicating Europe is not going out there and telling people how good Europe is for them. It's engaging with citizens, listening to their questions, answering to their worries. And this is not something we can do on our own from the European Commission. We need all member states to be engaged in this. We also need other actors to be engaged in this. I see an increasing willingness also on the side, for instance, of NGOs to speak up for Europe. I also see that in member states, politicians now understand that bashing Europe has long-term effects on public opinion about Europe. So for many years it was, everybody did it, in every member state. It was easy to say if there was a success, the member state had done it. If something didn't work well, it was Europe's fault. And then people are surprised that the support for Europe is diminishing in the population. It's a logical consequence of the behavior of our politicians. It's also a logical consequence of the fact that for many years, we at the European level have overpromised and underdelivered. I think I would be happier in a situation where we perhaps promise a bit less and deliver more than people expect. Then trust in Europe will return.
Thank you. Yuso Numi asks, how do you see the future relationship between the US and the EU?
The ties between the US and the European Union are strong and very deep and based on moral values, based on political values that we've shared for very, very long. We went through horror together. Twice in the last century, the Americans came to our rescue when we were engaged in a form of collective suicide as Europeans. So that will not disappear. That we have political differences now after the election of President Trump is clear. But our relationship doesn't depend on personalities or administrations. It depends on this long, strong undercurrent of shared values and shared destinies, frankly. If the European Union and the United States come together on global issues, we can shape and direct the future of this earth in a way that is compatible and in line with our fundamental values.
Mr. First Vice President, Jakob Uschelik says, I have a phone from China, clothing from Germany, and I work in a foreign company, and I have a right to work in any state of the EU I want. That is globalization. That's not so bad, is it?
No, it's great. And we need to make sure that the clothing you buy, what is it, India you said, is produced in a way that is consistent with our values. We have to make sure that if mobile phones are made in the future, they are made also in a circular way so that we don't deplete the Earth's resources and we can reuse the materials used. We have to make sure that we have agreements with other parts of the world, that this globalization is done on an equal footing. Then this is a good thing. Then it works for all of us. And I think there is not one European citizen, when he empties his pockets or looks in his cupboard, that doesn't have something that comes from one of the 5 continents. It's always from somewhere, not just from Europe. That's globalization indeed. But we need to make sure it is fair, and we also need to make sure that it works for everyone and not just the happy few.
William Johnson Smith says the EU should help the people, not the multinationals. How would you respond?
Obviously, we are a union of people and member states. And there's no point in the European Union if it's not for the people. And indeed, very often the impression was created that the aim or the goal of the European Union was a common market or a common currency. These are just tools. These are just tools to create a prosperous EU for our citizens. And fundamentally, the EU was created for a very specific reason, and I can't say this enough, and we should remember this always. It was created to prevent Europeans going at war with each other again. This was a pattern for centuries of every 30 years, some European nation would be at war with another European nation. The European Union has put an end to that. This is extremely valuable because it creates the possibility for Europeans to work together, to prosper together, to create economic growth, to create an economy where social justice is strong, instead of an economy where only the happy few reap the benefits of globalization.
On the same line, the globalization of now is not the same as perhaps in 20 years or in 2025. What are the challenges of globalization in 2025, according to you?
I think we will increasingly see that climate change has an influence on our lives and on the way the Earth develops. So I think making sure that we have less emissions, making sure that we don't deplete the Earth's resources, making sure that natural resources are available in an equitable way to the world. Resources like water, very fundamental resources, but also resources like metals you need, or resources like energy resources. These are some of the huge challenges we will be facing. And our economy is changing. We're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. Our economy is going to change into a robotized economy. We're not going to make things in the same way as before. This will have an impact on where things are produced, because labor costs are going to be less important for the production process than before. So that is all going to change the way our economy is structured. And the only thing we should do to make sure that we profit from this in a good way is to empower our citizens to be in a position to profit from this. And this means education, education, education. The new illiteracy in the world is not the inability not to be able to read or write. It's the inability to adapt, the inability to learn. And so we need to teach our children, but also everyone until the age of retirement, to be able to adapt to new circumstances, to be able to acquire new skills so that you can be successful in society, and also to learn to be critical thinkers, to know what is true and what isn't true, to know what is a myth and what is a reality, to be able to discern between people who are trying to help you and people who are trying to sell you nonsense. I think this is important, and this will define whether we will be successful in 2025 and beyond.
Thanos Furlas goes on this robotic issue and asks you whether we need a universal basic income.
I think that if in this economy as it develops, the definition of labor will change, because labor will no longer be, your labor productivity will no longer be how many units you can make in an hour's time, etc. We also have to rethink how we empower people to be able to be more creative, because creativity and services will become more important. And in that sense, people will have to have the time to not be in a workplace, but to learn new skills. And to make that possible for people, you have to make sure they don't lose too much of their income in the period they learn skills. And I think one of the solutions to achieve that is to have a universal basic income. I think that is the future of social security, to think about a form in which the income you have is not fully linked to the amount of work you do. It's also linked to other contributions you give to society, and also linked to the investment you make in yourselves to be able to learn new skills in this economy that will always be flexible and developing.
Ovidiu Dobresko asks, globalization is done with rules and laws. Inside the EU we have organizations to do that. But globalization outside is done by whom? Bilateral deals?
What we see is that the actors on the global scene who shape the form of globalization and the direction the world takes in have the size of continents. Sometimes they are nation states with the size of continents. Let's take the United States. And they are democracies governed by the rule of law with a lot of checks and balances. Sometimes they are continents with the size of China, with more than 1 billion people, where the public authorities are in a position to be far more directive in terms of shaping the economy, but also in terms of shaping policies. Sometimes you have mixed structures of that. You can't compare that in terms, it's not all the same. There are many differences. But one thing I can tell you is that those who will shape the relationships in this world, those who will shape the economy of the future, need to have the size of continents. In that sense, for European nations to be able to act and shape the future of the world together, they need to be united. And the European Union is the best instrument they have at their disposal. It is absolutely clear to me of course our nations on their own will survive, but they will be the ones who suffer or enjoy the consequences of decisions taken elsewhere. They will not be the shapers of the future on their own. But the EU, if nations, the 27 future member states of the European Union, stick together and have a plan together of how they want globalization to work for them, they will be the shapers of the future of the world's economy.
And there's a question about the role of women in globalization. What role is there for them?
Well, I think it's a shame that even in Europe, we still don't use the full potential of half of the population. Women still have almost 20% less pay for the same job as men. Women still have 40% less pension at the end of their working life. Women still don't get the promotions men get. Women still miss out on many things. If you see that in European universities, 60% of the graduates are women, but the take-up in the economy is certainly not 60%, then we still have a problem. So also given the demographic challenge we Europeans face, there will be less of us. We can't afford to just put half of our brain power on the back burner. We need every brain cell, and we should be distinguishing whether this is a male or a female brain cell. So really we need to empower women to take the role they need to take in the society of the future. And to empower women, men also will have to take a different role than the traditional roles we're used to. So giving men the opportunity to be fathers, to be present in the household, to take on tasks that traditionally were only attributed to women, is also a huge contribution to giving women the possibility to develop their talents in a way that benefits them personally, but also society as a whole.
Thank you. Filippo Italy talks about fair trade. He says this is a political choice. How can you get the rest of the world on board?
Well, you know, it might not be as difficult, it's not easy, but it's certainly not impossible, because everybody wants to sell on the European market. We are the biggest market with the most purchasing power in the world. So if we set the standards, producers from outside of Europe will want to meet those standards because they want to be on that market. And we should use that collective power to negotiate fair trade deals, to make sure that produce we buy from outside of Europe is produced according to the same standards as we want for our own production, to make sure that we don't deplete the world's resources in other parts of the world, to make sure that child labor is excluded from the production cycle, etc., etc. We are strong enough in negotiating with our trading partners to make this happen for the whole world.
You answered Federico Patuelli's question at the same time. There's another question by Olga Wessels. She says, in the reflection paper, you're speaking about education and research as a solution for negative effects of globalization. Can you tell more about these negative effects and the role that you see for education and research?
Well, you know, the negative effects of globalization have to do with changing production patterns, changing trade patterns, and also the increasing influence of research and development on new economic activities. You know, if you look at the list of global companies, the big global companies in these areas, Europe is trailing behind. Europe should get better organized to show that in the IT business, in the internet business, in the robotics, in modern mobility, we do better than we do today. And we should work together more with other European countries to learn from the best experiences in the educational system. If you look, for instance, at Germany with their dual system of education, to teach young people to learn a trade, but also to put them in businesses straight away so that they can learn the practical sides of the trade at the same time, is a very successful model that could be used in other European nations. But the most fundamental thing is this: we will have to get used to the idea that there is no end to learning new skills throughout your life until you stop working. There is no end to that. Education will no longer be something that only happens for 9, 10, 12 or 14 years. We will need to give ourselves the opportunity to learn and to adapt for the whole span of our lives. And this is, I think, a great opportunity. But our institutions, our educational facilities, and also our private sectors will have to adapt to that new reality as well.
There are two more questions. We only have time for two more. The first one is Peter Rutgers asks, how do you communicate all of this to younger children and pupils who are our future and will be in charge in 20 years?
Well, I think we have underestimated the importance of our educators as of the very youngest age of children going to school. It is extremely important that we give the tools to our educators to do this job with us. A Facebook Live session will not be life-changing at all. But if in schools from a very early age our children are taught how to adapt to the new realities, our children are taught how to accept diversity, how to be critical thinkers and not just accept any point that was made, how to look at what is different and who is different and engage with them, then you can create a level of creativity that will unleash an enormous force that will shape our economy of the future. And it all starts with education. It all starts with this very important principle that our citizens will be stronger citizens if they are capable of adaptation and if they are always capable of critical thinking.
And Mr. First Vice President, the last question about one of the best football teams in the Netherlands, by Wienand Speelman. What is your prediction for Roda this weekend?
I hope they can get a win in Arnhem. It's going to be a tough game. Vitesse is a very strong team. But I hope that we can win there and that we can then stay at the highest level of Dutch football without having to go in the playoffs later on this month. So I can just hope. Anyway, I want to thank you for having been part of this conversation. I want to thank you for your questions. And I'll be back soon on this topic or another topic. And I wish you a great weekend.